All right, guys, my name is Jason, and my segment's going to be specifically talking about landlord and tenant laws in Calgary versus here in Toronto. Okay, we're going to do an overview. What is the Landlord and Tenant Board? Basically, the LTB is an independent tribunal in Ontario solely responsible for resolving disputes between landlord and tenants. Basically, it's very short in the sense that if you are a landlord and own a rental property here, the only way that a tenant, let's say that a tenant stops paying rent, a tenant has damaged the property, or any other reason, the only way to evict a tenant essentially is through the LTB. You can't, that's the only way, period. The only way to get an eviction is through the Landlord and Tenant Board. So here are the challenges with that. So if you can only go through the Landlord and Tenant Board for an eviction, okay, let's say it's unpaid rent, for example, the backlog and delays these days today, right now, is between 6 to 12 months. So that's how long it would take for you to get a hearing and to essentially go through the process of evicting that tenant. Involved in that are high costs. You've got legal fees. Now, when it comes to legal fees for this, likely you're hiring a paralegal. Let's say that costs you maybe through the whole process $2,000 to $3,000. Fine. The real loss here is going to be the lost rental income. Is that if God forbid a tenant stops paying, let's say for a 12-month period, you're losing now that 12 months of time of rental income. Now, and then tenants have, let's say a hearing is booked, a tenant can definitely appeal that date. They could say for whatever reason they can't make it, they can't get time off work, whatever it is, and extend that time, which can make it even worse. So in Canada, in all of Canada, not Toronto, in all of Canada, 60% of evictions are due to unpaid rent, okay? Now in Toronto specifically, under the Landlord and Tenant Board, it takes an average of 342 days to resolve an eviction case due to non-payment of rent. That's practically a year's time. Okay, these are stats that actually just came out, by the way. Now, let's say you're a landlord in Toronto, God forbid tenant stops paying rent. Can you afford to pay the mortgage bill, the utility bill, and property taxes for almost a year? A Toronto-based property management firm denied 90 out of 175 applications due to fraudulent tenant profiles. That's over 50% of profiles were absolutely fake. What are fake profiles today? They're fake pay stubs, okay? Completely fake pay stubs. So either they do work where they work, but the income is inflated, it's fake. Their credit reports from Equifax, fake. Invalid IDs and more. All of these were cited in this property management's sort of their denial of the 90 applications. But we see this a lot as realtors, especially me as a realtor. I run into this, I can't tell you how many times. Okay, now we're going to talk about Calgary's sort of landlord and tenant laws. Calgary doesn't have a landlord and tenant board. They do have a Residential Tenancies Act of Alberta. We have our Residential Tenancies Act. Ours is based sort of, it's catered towards tenants mostly. In Calgary, it's mostly catered to landlords. So Calgary is a landlord-friendly city. We're going to talk about non-payment of rent in Calgary. What's the process versus Toronto? If a tenant does not pay rent on time in Calgary, the landlord can issue a 14-day notice to terminate tenancy for non-payment. Residential Tenancy Dispute Resolution Service is the equivalent of our Landlord and Tenant Board. That's their version of it. Now the difference is that the whole process is much faster than here. Here we have first of all, we're underfunded, the LTB is underfunded and they're understaffed, which is what's causing this huge backlog, as opposed to in Calgary, their Landlord and Tenant Board will deal with the whole situation from start to finish within a 4 to 6 week period. Rent control, okay, in Toronto, if you're a landlord and your property was built before November 2018, your investment property is under rent control. So just recently, when the interest rates went up and the expenses for landlords went up significantly, so they had tenants likely in their properties that were still paying rent that was priced maybe from 5 years ago. And that becomes tough as a landlord when your expenses go up. It's not really fair to you as an investor providing rental supply to the public that you're taking such a hard hit like that, right? Luckily in Alberta, you've got no rent control. Okay, so it's basically market driven. After 12 months, if you've got a yearly lease, for example, at the end of those 12 months, you're able to increase the rent to market value, to whatever that is. So again, this provides flexibility for landlords and it kind of reduces your risk as a landlord. Now, here's just a little bit comparison, side-by-side graph showing you just the difference between the city and Calgary. Eviction process 4 to 6 weeks in Calgary versus Toronto 6 to 12 plus months. Rent control, no rent control. In Toronto, you've got strict rent control measures, just an increase of 2.5% each year. Notice for rent payment, notice for non-payment of rent for any evictions, 14 days in Calgary. Here in Toronto, you need to provide multiple notices and you might get appeals as well. And then there's the cost difference of dealing with the entire process, just a couple $100 in Calgary. It's gonna cost you thousands, including rental loss in Toronto.